Hello there, I'm Black Bright, broadcasting out of the UK, as you probably know by now. Welcome to my channel. If it's the first time you're passing by, it probably isn't, but if it is, click the thumbs up, the thumbs down, share and subscribe. I wanted to talk about Nigel Farage. Now, I wonder how many of you know who Nigel Farage is. Well, if you're in the UK, you will remember him because he had some kind of involvement with that big poster with all those Syrian refugees fleeing from persecution. And he made the British public believe that these were immigrants that were waiting to be offloaded on UK shores. And because of that picture, people were so threatened by it. You can imagine that if you are in your country and you see, I don't know how, whether it was thousands or millions, all you could see is this long line of Syrians, but you didn't know they were Syrians. They made it look like these were people who were going to invade and live in UK, use their dole money, use their services, and they made it look so bad. And as a result, that I think that was significant in getting the Brexit vote, because anybody who is in a country and sees that there's going to be this influx of immigrants, lines long, waiting to come onto the shores, are going to think, bloody hell, we don't want that. That's only natural. But he was the instigator of that, and it was a untruth. It was an out and out lie. It was misrepresentation. And it was done to deceive. And after the damage was done, then he'll say, oh, had all of these excuses. But to do that, he had to have had a biased mindset. He had to have known what it would take to turn the British people, in particular the white British public, against the immigrants. And that's all it took, really. So anyway, because that got brushed underneath the carpet, even though it was an out and out lie, it was kind of brushed under the carpet. The same way like the little quips from Boris Johnson, where he was talking about pickaninnies and then he was calling Muslim women letterboxes. That got swept underneath the carpet. Oh, it's nothing. And I think that because people in power, I have to say, Nigel Farage has got a lot of power. Boris Johnson, he's got even more power. And when people in those positions of power get away with making statements like that with no repercussions, it gives the impression that that is the status quo. That is the new normal. Racism is the new normal. And what it gives us the impression also is that, if a black person complains a little bit about it, there's this big spread about, oh, they're so serious, they're so sensitive. It's just a little quip. I was just being satirical. But, if you're a Muslim woman and you hold your faith to your heart and you're told that you look like a letterbox, that's very insulting. That is not satirical. That is offensive. And that is the problem. When you don't understand racism, you don't understand what is offensive from what is not. And then anybody who kind of calls people out about it are considered oversensitive. And there's nothing wrong with it. So it's that kind of situation. Well, coming back to Nigel Farage. Now, we all know that LBC, they normally mollycoddle people who have extreme views, or who, I won't say extreme views, but they have, they're kind of far right, though, on LBC. So for them to cut Nigel Farage's contract with immediate effect, that makes a statement. Because you would have thought on LBC, you would have had more or less free reign. Of course, you have to operate with some sensitivity. But what does Nigel Farage equate the protesters to? Members of the Taliban. extreme extremists, and it's those kind of things that they throw out there, and they have got away with it in the past. And I am so glad that, people are seeing the insensitivity of all of this. They're seeing how people in positions of power have been getting away with making these comments. And maybe, maybe black people haven't been overreacting. So I kind of feel as though other people have got our backs apart from ourselves. And that's a really reassuring feeling. The fact that the wider community, because it's a minority that is racist, it's not the majority, it's a minority. And I think what people like Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, and those of their ilk believed was that the majority were racist. I mean, as long as you were white, they had the feeling that you were inherently racist. And I don't believe that is true. I believe, just like anybody else, if you had to fight your corner, you would fight for your own. You're not going to fight for somebody else's corner. But at the same token, it doesn't mean that you're going to be complicit in injustice. And it doesn't mean that you're going to stand by and watch like those 3 officers did when they watched Derek Chauvin kneel on George Floyd's neck until he died. Because the thing is, silence means that you're in agreement. Silence means that you are complicit. And when you see these acts of racism and discrimination and you don't say anything because you're trying to safeguard yourself, you don't want to get involved. The thing is with that is that it perpetuates it and it continues. So by LBC making a stand, that is a bold statement. That is a seriously bold statement. Because when you think about what LBC kind of represents in a kind of covert way, it's quite interesting that they've managed to make a statement like that, because it's almost like people have got a sudden awareness. It's most bizarre. And we could never, as black people, we could never have shed a light on what has been happening over the years by ourselves. We could never have done it. No way on earth. We would have always been accused of having a chip on our shoulder. People would never have believed that we were being discriminated against by the police, that we were being shot at, that, all of these things, not generalizations, remember, but certain police officers, but people just wouldn't have believed it. They would have just thought, oh, they're always at it. They're always going on about something. So, like I keep talking about George Floyd because he has he's kind of done so much. And he's kind of done so much for everybody. For everybody all over the world. I'm not going to place him on any kind of pedestal. But what he's doing by lifting the lid on racism is actually bringing black and white people together. When you see black and white people marching, it's like they're bringing them together. And the minority of racists won't know whether they're coming or going. Because the way that they get their thrill is by getting everybody on board and making black people seem as though they're the bad guys. They're the ones who are taking all your benefits. They're the ones who are taking all your money. They're the ones who are taking all your jobs. That is their goal, to turn whites against blacks. And and it's interesting that because of what has happened, it's turned everything on its head. I don't quite know how we're going to go forward, but we do know that once that poster went up about the Syrians, there was an increase in xenophobia. When Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, the same thing happened. And so when people like that, sorry, when people like Boris Johnson get in power, despite their values, it almost gives racists permission to do what they want because they feel as though they have support of that person in power. It's like with Donald Trump, when he's seen not to be supporting or against the minorities, it's almost like he's giving the country permission to lynch, to kill. He's giving police officers permission to kill immigrants because he's more or less saying, look, it's them against us. Not in so many words, but that is the implication when he talks in such a disparaging term. So, so what else have I got to say with my little notes? I was going to say, as we know, that poster was the start of what changed to me, what changed relationships between foreign nationals and white Brits. Because I remember when that poster came out and they were talking about immigrants and this and that, and I remember feeling that no one knows where I am born. No one knows. If a racist saw me on the street, he wouldn't know I'm born in Britain. He would just see me as a black person. And I remember when that poster went out and there was this big furor about immigrants and this and that, I was terrified. I was thinking, bloody hell, they're out to get all these blacks. If they see me, they're not gonna wait for me to open up my mouth and give my little London accent. They're not gonna do that. So I just thought to myself, it was quite a terrifying period then. And that on the back of that, they brought out the Hostile Environment Act, which made it worse. Blacks were already feeling vulnerable because of that big old poster. From the poster, you can't tell what colour those people were. You couldn't tell they were Syrians. You just saw a load of people. It was taken far away enough and disguised and blurred enough that you couldn't see the ethnicity of the people on that poster. Just miles of people. Very, very impactful poster. But my point is that when that came out and then on top of it, they compounded it with the Hostile Environment Act, which meant that, people, foreign nationals, they had problems. Everything had to be checked out from the NHS, from the landlords, from the banks, from the DVLA. And while it's being checked, people's lives are stopping. And some people, they just couldn't even be bothered to check because they're like, oh, it's just too much problems. It's just too much worry. I can't even be bothered. When it came to renting, as from you were black or you had a funny name, they weren't even entertaining you. And that's what it did to Black lives. It made them feel isolated and vulnerable. And then just as we get on our feet and just as we kind of build up a sense of trust again between black and white people, we get this thing about George Floyd. Now, that's not to say that this racism hasn't been continuing all that time. It has, but it's kind of been suppressed and it's only affected black people and minority ethnics. It hasn't affected white people before. But now, because white people have seen what another white person can do to a black person, it's almost like, they're kind of thinking, no, this is not right. It's not right that people are behaving this way in 2020. It's not right where they behave regardless of what year it is, but you would have thought that in 2020, people would be more evolved and more enlightened about race and culture and ethnicity. So you wouldn't expect to see that. And I think it kind of galvanized that humanity between all of us. And like I'm often saying, this fight, we cannot fight this by ourselves. It does take a community. And it does take unity. So, and then before that, so they did the Hostile Environment Act that white people would not have known about. They would not have known how it. Well, they would have known in as far as if if um if they didn't want any problems and a black person turned up at their door, they would know that it would be a problem if they took on a black person because it meant that they'd have to do double checks. So they couldn't be bothered with that, and maybe black people couldn't even be bothered with it. I don't even know if you have to go through you have to call the Home Office and this and that. You're going to think I can't be asked, but you would not have thought. I don't think a white person would have thought, oh, that is discriminatory. I think that person would have genuinely thought that that person was an illegal immigrant because remember they have that big hype about illegal immigrants and how many there were and there was all these millions and then you find that half of them they're not even illegal. Half of them have been deported unlawfully. Half of them, there's how many halves are there? I should say some of them. Some of them have been deported unlawfully. Some of them are detained in immigration centres unlawfully. So they make up these masses of numbers of, illegal immigrants, once again to raise fears in white people. Once again and they were making out like these people were taking jobs and working under the table and therefore getting this money here and that money. They were making their lives hell. And that's why it was called hostile environment policy, because they reckoned that these black people or people of colour or black and minority ethnics, they would make their life or their environment so hostile they'd want to leave. The problem is the majority of them lived in this country for years and years, and there's nowhere for them to go back to. Despite that, they still shipped them all off. A lot of them went off. We don't even know the numbers, and because they're in collaboration with the governments of certain countries, I don't want to call any names, they are not giving us the figures of how many people that have been sent across unlawfully, deported unlawfully. And so when you think about racism in those terms and at that level, it becomes institutional because it's the institution that is ganging up and making legislation so it disadvantages certain people. And then when you realize that and the lid is off, and I think white people will start taking attention. What I think, yes, we all have our own issues and we all have our own problems, but I don't think white people will be so gullible in future. I don't think they'll take things on the chin so much. I don't think they'll look at something on TV, whereas they might show all these black faces who are criminals. I think they might be a bit more skeptical, and I think they might, have that little moment where they might not just take so much for granted. I have a funny feeling, because I have a funny feeling we're on the same page here. I really do, and it's a really warm feeling. It doesn't feel like it's them against us. It makes me feel as though it's a majority against a minority. And that is a much more secure feeling than the other way around. So, under the Commonwealth Immigration Act 1962, Commonwealth citizens were automatically entitled to settled status, but in taking out the clause protecting them, and that was out of the 1999 legislation, and then compounding it by destroying boarding passes, which were evidence, suggests once again institutional racism was at play. So you're getting all of these little bits and pieces that are cropping up now that is showing the world how racism plays out. A lot of people think racism plays out by someone calling someone a nigger, a coon, these fights and racist fights. Or that is small fry. That is small fry. When you have institutional racism, that is where it matters, because it might be a small minority, but it's a small minority that has power. And when that small minority who has power decides to effect legislation in a way that it affects minorities, it disadvantages minorities, and it's done in such a subtle way that nobody knows, that is when it is a problem. And that is how it's played out in all these different legislations. So people think about the Windrush and they think, oh, it's just a Windrush. It's just those people that came over here. I don't know what we're talking about it now for. It was all the way in 1948, 1973. Why do they keep bringing it up? We keep bringing it up because people were tricked. It was another form of a race. It was another racist move. Because when you think that a lot of you may not know this, mind you, if you're watching my channel, you probably will, but you were dealing with a group of people where England and the Commonwealth were one. Same queen, same education system, they were one. It's only that they were in different parts, but they were one because they were colonized by the Brits. Okay, so they didn't, when they came over, it's like going over to Ireland or going over to Scotland or going over to Wales. That is what it was like when the Commonwealth people came over here. It was no different. You don't need a passport or any papers to go to Ireland or to go to Wales. And they didn't need any papers to come to the UK. And then what the UK government did, which targeted just the Commonwealth people, which are people of colour, they decided all of a sudden, out of the blue, that they needed papers. Where would they get these papers from? It's just like saying you're going to Ireland and you don't need any papers. And then 20 or 40 years down the line, they're telling us to provide papers. It's exactly the same thing. So now we have a situation where they took out the clause that protected the Commonwealth citizens from being deported. And that's what I'm talking about when they changed legislation. Always taking out bits of legislation to disadvantage. And they take it out so surreptitiously. And then, so people think everything's normal. Nobody knows anything has changed until they decide, oh, this is what we're going to do. And, oh, yeah, you're going to be affected because you came in after 1973. You came in after 1983. Because you were born after 1981, you're not automatically a citizen. And they have all of these legislations that they've changed as they're going along. Nobody knows. And with the British Nationality Act, it's the same thing. It's designed to disadvantage. And the thing is that, yeah, you can say, this is our country, this is a white country. We don't want blacks over here. We want our country back. And you're entitled to say that. But you can't lock the door after the horse has bolted. We were one country at one point, and we were invited over. And we set up our lives and we had our families and we worked and we paid our taxes and did all of that. So you can't now, when you had no agreement that it was short term, say, look, we want the whole of you to leave now. It doesn't work like that. I'm sure if even any white person who decided to immigrate to Australia and you've set up your family there and you've got your schools and everything, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, look, you've got to go back to where you came from. It's just like, it doesn't work like that. And it doesn't mean that it's any different because we have colour in our skins. There needs to be equality and justice for all. And that is what this is about. So, what else have I got in my little notes that I keep writing down? So I've put in 2020, I've already said that actually. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about interracial couples because I was reading, because when you see about interracial couples, and I think when Meghan when Meghan met Harry. But when Meghan and Harry got married, I think because they saw so many interracial couples, they didn't think anything of it. I don't think they thought that they was going to get the stick that they did. But the interesting thing that I read, I'm going to put the link before, was that the majority of white people who marry outside their race are not white Brits. They're white Irish, white Scottish, white this, Eastern Europeans. But white English, they reckon, are less likely so. Their heritage is normally Irish or Scottish or Eastern European. I don't know how true that is. I mean, of course, you're going to have some who might be white English, but I think that is why Harry got that reception he did, because if we're seeing interracial couples, like my brother, he's been with this Scottish woman for goodness knows how long. That's an interracial. But if we're thinking about Harry marrying Meghan, and Harry is a white Brit, that's probably why it turned hostile and nasty. Because had he not been a white Brit, even though, I mean, we're all mixed up and somewhere down the line, but as far as they're concerned, he's a white English. I don't think that there would have been all that controversy, but I think it's the white Brits, the white English, that kicked up the stink. Because when we see interracial couples, we don't think, oh, their parents are Irish, their parents are Scottish. You just think black and white, don't you? It'd be interesting to know how many white English have married outside their race. And when I say outside their race, I mean, anybody who's black or a minority ethnic. But white English down the line, not white English Irish back descent or white English Scottish descent, white English. Be interesting to know how many of them marry outside their race, or whether that is that core set of people who have an issue with minorities under any circumstances. You haven't said that. Boris is what got German in him or something. Anyway, I'm not going to keep my videos long. I just can't help it. I'm sorry, peeps. In the US, 17% of all newlyweds are interracial. More people defending the cause of all colours. Silence means complicit. Racism must be addressed, and not from a victim mentality, but from a standpoint of equality and justice for all. Yeah, we know that the statues are being challenged. What do they represent? Some people say they're symbols of imperialism, of imperialist oppression. Baden-Powell, there's some kind of argument about him because he started the Scouts movement, so they don't think his statue should be removed. It's actually the council who are removing these statues. Cecil Rhodes, Edward Colston, Robert Klein. So I guess what I'm saying is that united we stand, divided we fall. I'm glad that, this is raised in awareness. Sometimes it takes a tragedy to raise awareness. And that's all I've got to say. Bye-bye.